Welcome to today's Hopkins Hour online seminar titled Equity and Access in Rehabilitation and Healthcare Following Brain Injury. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to all Hopkins Centre members, partners, collaborators and other guests who are joining us here today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands upon which we are all meeting from today. For me, sitting here on the beautiful country of the Nathan campus, that is the Turrbal and Yagara people, I would like to extend my respects to the elders past and present, to all members of the Griffith community and all people joining us here today who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I think it's very important that we remember and acknowledge that these lands upon which we live and work have always been places of learning and teaching, and it's wonderful to be able to continue that tradition with these Hopkins Hours. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Louise Gustafsson, and I am Program Lead of the Enabling Technologies and Environments stream in the Hopkins Centre. I'm also very proud to say that I was supervisor of Kirsty Laurie for her PhD thesis and studies. I'm going to be the chair of today's online seminar. So in just a moment, I'm going to be handing over to who I can now call Dr. Kirsty Laurie. She has just recently had her PhD confirmed, and which I'd like to greatly congratulate her on in this forum. But she's going to present a portion of her PhD thesis work to us today. And her thesis investigated the topic of access to post-acute rehabilitation and appropriateness of that access. So Kirsty is going to discuss the implication of her research today with us. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. We are very aware that internet connections can vary very much in this online environment. So if you do experience difficulties, please feel free to put a question in the chat via the toolbar, and one of our event teams will see if they can help you to solve the problem. So for those of you who are not too familiar with this environment, just along the top of the screen, you'll see a number of icons, and there's a little chat icon, looks like a little kind of a word coming out with a couple of lines in it, so you can pop some questions in there. But if all else fails, we certainly would encourage you to just simply log out and back in, because sometimes that will correct whatever difficulty you're having. For those of you who are hearing impaired, there is real-time captioning available via the URL link that our events team have popped into the chat also for you. We really encourage you, as the question comes to mind, or if you think of something as Kirsty's presenting today, please pop those questions or thoughts into the chat. We really like these to be very interactive sections. So again, just navigate and click the link on that chat function, and you'll get a panel down on the right-hand side of the screen where you can type your questions or your thoughts. You will also have the option to ask questions verbally if typing is not available to you, and if you'd prefer just to ask the question. All questions will be moderated by our events team, and we will certainly address them at the end of the presentation. And Kirsty will answer as many questions as she can at this time. And we also have a wonderful panel who are joining us who will help us to discuss those. And I will introduce them after Kirsty's presentation. But it gives me great pleasure right now to hand over to Dr. Kirsty Laurie, who is going to present for us.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you for everyone that's joining us today, and to our panel members who you'll be hearing from a bit later. So, as Louise said, today I'll be presenting some of my PhD research. And this research and this presentation focuses on the experience of people who have acquired a brain injury. So an acquired brain injury encompasses those who have sustained a traumatic brain injury and those who have sustained an injury through non-traumatic processes such as stroke, for example. So an acquired brain injury can result in impairments in cognitive, functional, social, and behavioural domains. As a result, an acquired brain injury is associated with a complex recovery and rehabilitation pathway. So multiple services are required to address the wide range of symptoms that are characteristic of an acquired brain injury. However, individuals with acquired brain injury often face challenges in accessing appropriate services to meet their needs. So the collaboration and coordination of professionals from different fields is crucial to providing comprehensive and integrated care. However, unfortunately, many people with acquired brain injury do not receive appropriate post-acute rehabilitation and healthcare services or are unable to access specialised follow-up care. So appropriateness of access is an important concept, and this concerns the fit of the service to the individual, and it centres around issues of timeliness, quality of care, adequacy, and continuity of care. So the appropriateness of access is of particular importance in relation to the brain injury rehabilitation continuum, as often individuals are already linked into services during inpatient or acute care. And so understanding the experience of access after reaching those services is really important. However, assessment and measurement of an individual's perspective of appropriate access can be challenging. So the measurement of need and unmet need can be used in patient populations as a tool for understanding their experience. And so the notion of unmet need is the difference between the desired state and the current state of the individual. And so this is often measured and encompasses things like emotional, cognitive, and social needs and unmet needs. So research that utilises unmet need tells us that access to the required health and rehabilitation services often reduces across the transition from inpatient care back into the community. So many people are not receiving the adequate care and they're reporting high unmet needs. So how we measure needs and unmet needs is often captured by health professionals and caregivers. So the use of patient-reported outcomes and needs and unmet needs in acquired brain injury research has often been overlooked, often due to concerns about awareness or insight of the individual due to cognitive impairments that are associated with an acquired brain injury. However, while there is reduced awareness and insight, research shows that often gains are made over time and that individuals with acquired brain injury can accurately assess their functional limitations and health-related quality of life. So while providing important information about access, current measures of need and unmet need is really dependent on the sufficiency of the specific measures. And they're mostly designed to be collected at a single time point. So services for people with acquired brain injury are often funded through programs such as NDIS and NISQ. And these are centred around allocations of funding for supports that are identified through semi-regular planning meetings with the participant. And these are often based around their short and long-term goals. So expanding the focus of need and unmet need to individuals being able to identify their own needs for services and how they're met over a given time period may have important implications for how we allocate, monitor, and evaluate services. So to understand the research into the personal perspective, we conducted a scoping review, and the objective was to identify key characteristics of appropriate access as defined by the personal experiences of adults with acquired brain injury to post-acute care services. So what we found was that there are a number of dominant elements which were important, and these were categorised into the characteristics of the service and the characteristics of the health system. And so the characteristics of the services had included provider expertise, interpersonal qualities, partnership, and adaptability. And the characteristics of the health system included being able to navigate the system, integrated care, adequacy, and opportunity. So the review also revealed several gaps in our knowledge. So the results indicated that the majority of studies sampled participants with an average of over 1 year post-injury, and with some studies sampling participants ranging over 10 years in difference. Also indicated that the state of research consists primarily of recollection-based reports, so requiring the participant to reflect on their access experience at a different time point. And we also found that there was a simplistic understanding of access from a quantitative perspective. So it doesn't capture the complexity around the fit for need and the adequacy of services that people have been receiving and how it relates to their need. So the objective of my research was to address several of these knowledge gaps. So firstly, it was focusing on longitudinal research, particularly collected in the months after discharge from inpatient rehabilitation, using a complex measurement of needs and service provision, which I'll discuss a little bit later. And finally, research emphasised that specialist rehabilitation programs were key to recovery. So individuals that are admitted to specialist rehabilitation units are, in theory, well placed for optimum recovery and access to services. So at the time, the Specialist Transitional Rehabilitation Service, so ABI-TRS, the pilot program was being delivered as an optional component of the brain injury rehabilitation service continuum. So sampling from individuals that were able to access this, who should be in an optimum position, would help us understand how these services are meeting the needs of people with brain injury. So to address this, we conducted a prospective cohort study. So we sampled, we recruited people from the Brain Injury Rehabilitation Unit at the Princess Alexandra Hospital. So we recruited people just before they discharged, and then we followed up at 3, 6, and 12 months post-injury. Post-discharge, not post-injury. Sorry, technical difficulties. There we go. So follow-up was through telephone interviews, and the interviews included a number of different measures. So the measure we used to capture need and unmet need was called the Needs and Provision Complexity Scale. So this was developed to gain insight into the needs of individuals with complex neurological disabilities. So it measures the rehabilitation and support needs and the adequacy of these services. The tool consists of 2 parts, so the Needs and Provision Complexity Scale Needs section and the Gets section. So the Needs is used to evaluate what the individual believes their needs are, and the Gets is completed at a different time point, and it is used to evaluate the level of access to those services and how they met those needs. We also captured the individual's age, sex, injury, severity, and funding pathway, for example, NDIS, NISQ, and if they accessed ABI-TRS as well. We also collected additional measures, so for example, health-related quality of life, psychological well-being, global functioning and community integration, and return to work as well. Okay, so our sample consisted of 51 adults who completed the telephone interview at 3 months and 49 who completed the telephone interview at 6 months. As you can see, there's a table there that describes our sample. So participants were on average 46 years old and were mostly male. Approximately half of the sample sustained a traumatic brain injury, and all of those who sustained a traumatic brain injury met classifications for a severe injury. And you can see here the funding NDIS, so 71% were funded by NDIS. And 59% engaged in ABI-TRS. So from the Prospective study, I conducted 2 smaller studies, which I'm going to talk about separately. So the first one utilised the data from the 3 and 6 month time point, as you can see here. So this study was an exploratory study, and the objective was to investigate how people with an acquired brain injury perceive their needs and adequacy of their realised access to post-acute services in the first 6 months after discharge from inpatient rehabilitation. And the second aim was to determine the influence of funding pathways and participation in transitional rehabilitation on unmet need. So we conducted a series of logistic regression models. So the analysis revealed that 60% of unmet rehabilitation needs were reported, followed by unmet healthcare needs, which was 40%, 35% social care needs, and 32% personal care needs, and 14% of environmental needs. So discrepancies were found between needs and provisions in rehabilitation, family caregiver support, and vocational rehabilitation. So consistent with previous studies, most participants, so 71%, indicated at least one met need across the domains. Okay, oops. So the second aim was to determine the influence of funding pathways and participation in transitional rehabilitation. So we found that those who participated in a transitional rehabilitation program were actually more likely to indicate unmet healthcare needs. So there was consideration of whether people who participated in the transitional rehabilitation services had greater levels of disability, which could partly explain this finding. However, based on the functional independence measure, the opposite was found, and that was that participants who attended transitional rehabilitation had lower levels of physical disability. So we didn't find any evidence for funding allocation influence on unmet needs or reported adequacy. So what this study reflected was that there were challenges from, moving away from time-limited and supportive structures such as ABI-TRS. Additionally, this may suggest that those who participated in a transitional rehabilitation program may have increased expectation of services and functional gains when they leave the program, which potentially could result in greater reported unmet needs. So the second study used the data we collected from 3, 6, and 12 months. So this study aimed to examine the effects of perceived rehabilitation adequacy and unmet rehabilitation needs at 6 months after discharge on functional and psychosocial outcomes at 12 months. So it was hypothesized that rehabilitation inadequacy and unmet rehabilitation needs would be associated with poorer health-related quality of life, psychological well-being, and global functioning, and lower rates of return to work. So we conducted a series of regressions. And results indicated that, as hypothesized, inadequate rehabilitation was associated with higher symptoms of anxiety and stress at 12 months. We didn't find any evidence to support the hypothesis that rehabilitation inadequacy was associated with other outcomes, such as health-related quality of life, depression, global functioning, or return to work. We also did not find any evidence to support the hypothesis that unmet rehabilitation needs were associated with these either. So these findings suggest that personal appraisals of rehabilitation adequacy in the first 6 months after leaving inpatient rehabilitation may influence the ongoing psychological well-being of people with acquired brain injury. So the study demonstrated that ongoing psychological well-being is influenced by the personal assessments of rehabilitation adequacy after leaving inpatient rehabilitation in the first 6 months. So adequacy emerged as an important factor when considering service evaluation from the personal perspective. Oops. All right, so what are the implications of these findings together? So the research indicates that personal appraisal of adequacy may be important, and it provides a target of inquiry when considering indicators to support individuals' adjustment and goals of service provision. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, patient-reported measurement was used for these studies, and this has often been overlooked in other research partly because of concerns about lack of awareness and the impact, the cognitive impairments. However, this research supports the use of patient-reported measurements in research. And treatment evaluation for people with acquired brain injury. So the measurement that was used was something that provides support for including an individual's perspective. So in terms of recommendations, when thinking about evaluating services, clinicians may consider self-report assessments for needs and service adequacy. These studies demonstrated the utility of patient-reported measurements. The research also indicated the utility of being able to assess across time. So services such as NDIS and NISQ are funded through programs that have semi-regular planning meetings. So being able to use a measure that provides that time difference is really important, and that's what we have found with our research. So one of the key findings of our study is that individuals with acquired brain injury have ongoing needs that change over time. So the findings demonstrate that individuals have a substantial need for services in the first 12 months after discharge, and there are discrepancies between the perceived needs and the provision of services over time. And this is consistent with prior research that has found that a substantial proportion of people who acquire a brain injury do not receive adequate post-acute care services in the community. So this finding highlights the need for extended service availability beyond the traditional 3-month post-discharge period. So finally, it's essential to align access to services and supports with the ongoing rehabilitation and health support needs of people with acquired brain injury. So our study highlights the challenges of transitioning away from time-limited structures, such as a specialist transitional rehabilitation that lasts for 3 months. So to ensure effective support, we should design comprehensive and personalised approaches to service provision that address the evolving needs of individuals with acquired brain injury. So it is important to acknowledge that these results should be interpreted with consideration of some limitations. And so one of which is that there was a small sample size. So we had between 51 and 49 across time. So that can impact if we were able to find relationships that may exist within the data. The sample was also limited to a specific geographic region. So that also impacts the generalizability of the findings. We also, while it was a positive of the research that we use self-report measures, perhaps being able to use self-report alongside caregiver and health professional measures may add, to what we found and provide additional insight. Sped through that one. There we go. Okay. Sorry, I think I sped through that.
That's wonderful. Oh, thank you, Kirsty, so much for that presentation. We will now welcome questions. So I just encourage you all, if you have a question for Kirsty at this point in time, feel free to type that question into the chat box now, or of course, you're also welcome to use the little raise hand function up along the top of the screen to raise your hand and to ask a question or to comment on the findings. Whilst people are thinking about those questions and gathering their thoughts there, I'm wondering whether I might invite our panel to start to turn their cameras on. And I will also start to introduce all of you because I feel like there's going to be some kind of overlap between the questions. I can see that we have a question that's been popped up there by Vilia, who said, thank you for conducting this valuable research. I am curious about your background and what led you to research this topic, Kirsty.
Great question. So my background is working, so I'm a psychologist by trade, and I have worked, I guess, broadly in the health and disability field before starting this research. I think what attracted me to this particular area was including the individual's perspective. I really liked being able to focus on something that could really include the personal voice.
Great, thank you, Kirsty. And while people are thinking and typing away there madly, I am going to start to introduce our panel, if that's okay. I would like to welcome all of our panelists here and firstly introduce and welcome Ben Turner. So Ben is an occupational therapist and manager of the Acquired Brain Injury Outreach Service at the Metro South Health Division of Rehabilitation, located in the Princess Alexandra Hospital. So thank you for joining us today, Ben. I'm not sure what order people are on everybody's screen, but I'm next going to introduce to you all Tim Matthews and welcome you to the panel, Tim. Tim joined ABI TRS following acquired brain injury as a result of a mountain bike accident in 2021. Tim's own experience with ABI has shown him how vital good support is to the recovery process. He thinks we should be doing anything we can to increase people's accessibility to it. Tim, we're really grateful for you giving up time and joining us today, and we look forward to your contributions. And then sharing a screen, we have Sally Wooler and Karen Hanna. Karen Hanna is a STEPS program leader and consumer representative at ABIOS and understands the importance of good processes and accessibility to rehabilitation. Karen uses her own lived experience of stroke 5 years ago to assist others in understanding their stroke experience when formulating new thoughts and processes. And as part of the STEPS program, Karen can see the changes in participants when social rehabilitation occurs. And it's a shift that she finds inspiring. So thank you very much, Karen, for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your contributions. And then the final member of our panel is Sally Wooler. Welcome, Sally. Sally is an advanced social worker and rehabilitation coordinator for ABIOS. Sally has previously been working also in ABI TRS, so the Transitional Rehabilitation Service, where she was investigating the impact of the transitional rehabilitation work on significant others. So I'd like to welcome all of our panel there. So thank you very much. I can see that while we have been chatting, there's been another question popped in the chat there. So I'll pose this to you, Kirsty, first of all. Your research found that 3 months was inadequate for follow-up. What length of time will be more adequate for follow-up?
I think that's a great question. And I guess what I feel was that the research indicates that it is dependent on the individual, and I guess emphasizes the need to continue on and follow up and I guess adjust what services individuals can access over that time period.
I think definitely as a research team, and I'm going to start to throw to the panel here, we were quite surprised by the findings in terms of the differences as people came out of specialist pathways. So I guess I'm going to start to ask the panel for their thoughts and comments. And I know Kirsty touched on these, but we're really interested on everybody's perspectives. Why was it that people in the specialist pathways had more needs as they came out of those pathways than those who perhaps weren't receiving those services? And we started to wonder whether this was a transitional need that isn't being met. So I guess I'm going to ask Tim and Karen, if I could, first of all, to comment. Do these findings align with your experiences or what you hear from other lived experts? To Tim, first of all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I was in hospital for 6 weeks, I think, and then did the 3-month ABI TRS transitional rehab program. That was a really great program for me. Like, when you wake up in hospital after a significant accident, like the world's just kind of thrown upside down. And the ABI TRS team really felt like I had some friends with me who, like, even if they hadn't lived through what I had lived through, they understood what I was going through and could walk alongside me with that. So that 3-month program was really great, and sort of left it feeling like I was, had all the tools I needed to, to continue my recovery. Sort of 6 months post discharge, it was definitely sort of a time when I think I was probably finding it really tough. I didn't really have that community around me anymore that ABI TRS guys had provided. And I wasn't back at work, I wasn't back at driving. So you're dealing with a lot of depressive episodes, and every day can be a bit of a mental health crisis, because the whole world has just been turned upside down. I think if there's ever an option to sort of extend that 3-month rehab service into something a bit longer, depending on the individual's needs, then that would be a really good thing for them. I remember learning from one of the doctors that you can have 2 people whose brains scan exactly the same, but their functionality is completely different, and that just blew my mind. That brain injury is such a individualized thing and such an individualized recovery But we live in an industrial world that loves everything to be the same. Yeah, and whatever flexibility we can give the patients in terms of the support we give them and helping them meet those unmet needs, I think will be great.
Great, there's some great insights there, Tim. Thank you. Karen, is this aligned with your experience as well?
No, not at all. I was a patient at the Royal Brisbane Hospital, and when I was discharged from the hospital, that was it. I fell into the abyss. Well, that's what it felt like to me. So maybe for the next several months, I had no link to any kind of further rehabilitation or any of the services. And I remember the doctor saying to me, "You're right to go home." And I thought, home to what? I didn't have any of that support. And it wasn't until maybe 18 months later, I actually heard about a program called STEPS. And that's what sort of got me back into the community. But it feels like there was a chunk missing from what other patients that have been through the PA program had versus what I had at the Royal Brisbane Hospital. So the importance of rehabilitation and support I can see is absolutely crucial, and it wasn't something that was offered to me. I had to find and navigate it myself. And as Tim said, you've had the rug pulled out from underneath you, your life has changed, and you have to try and think, well, what is the system and what is the process? So I'm just very happy that we're having these discussions, that we can help others maybe not go through what I went through.
Thank you, Karen. I'm sorry, as I'm sure many people are, as to hear that that was your experience, but I'm very happy to hear that you found your way to STEPS. Your point really highlights and I guess furthers what Tim was saying before. There's an individual nature to the brain injury, but there can also be a geographic element to what's available depending on where you are and what service you're in as well. So I think that's a really important one for us to consider. Ben and Sally, for you, from Abios perspective, I guess you're probably seeing a lot of people after they've left this specialist pathway, and of course you can't be working as much as we'd love you to with everybody. I'm sure there's people that fall through the cracks, but again, I'd love to hear your perspectives or thoughts on these findings. So maybe to you, Ben, first.
Sure, thanks Louise, and thanks Kirsty for your presentation. And I think Tim and Karen have captured two quite different experiences, and I guess at Abios we see a broad range of experiences and journeys post-discharge from hospital for people with an acquired brain injury. I think there is strong evidence, and I know clinically we see that there is strong importance in having quite intensive post-discharge follow-up and support in that early transition phase. But we also know that clinically that the journey doesn't end after those initial few months at home. In fact, the journey continues and is often long-term, if not lifelong, for many people. And so I think over time there is that need to look towards how people can build sustainable networks of support that are suitably matched to their identified needs and goals to enable people to continue to move forward. And I think it's important to acknowledge that over the past 5 or 6 years that there's been a significant change in the landscape of health and disability services. both from a health perspective, with developing new components and models of care around community rehabilitation, but then also in the disability space with the emergence of the NDIS and other systems which can really complement and add to and make a significant difference in a person's life. But also, after having experienced a brain injury, these systems can be really challenging for people to navigate as well. And unfortunately, we still see a lot of people who fall through the cracks and miss out on that early access to post-discharge transitional rehabilitation and sometimes even longer-term rehabilitation, and not able to self-advocate for their own needs, and therefore continue to experience or adverse outcomes relating to simply that they're not able to connect to the services and supports that are really necessary to address their ongoing needs. So I think that's an area that we need to look towards. Brain injury often is referred to as a hidden disability, and we commonly find that many years now post rollout of the NDIS, people with long-term brain injury living in the community who have not been able to navigate the process of connecting to, let alone accessing support through that scheme. So yeah, just a few general thoughts. Not sure, Sally, you might want to add upon that.
I would probably echo everything that you've said. Thanks, Kirsty, also for your presentation, and well done on your PhD. I think the only thing that maybe crossed my mind when I was looking at your research findings was, obviously I've worked in the ABI-TRS space, and now I've got that benefit of engaging with people longer term in their journey. And like Ben said, we know that brain injury isn't a quick fix, and it's something that impacts people's lives ongoing. I was wondering if perhaps the findings are reflective of people that are engaged in longer term rehab, if that plays a role in increasing people's awareness of their healthcare rights and expanding their health literacy, so they might become more aware now of what their healthcare needs are. No idea. I've obviously never done research around it. But I was also thinking, in that acknowledgement of people that have, brain injuries from more organic causes due to other, poor health, is it that they've got this unmet health need because of the complexities of brain injury? And like I just said before, are they more aware of that now because of engaging in services longer term? Yeah, don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and something that we did think about when kind of exploring that result, because I guess what's important to know is that there is research that shows how wonderful ABI-TRS is as a service, and people and obviously that was reflected in what Tim said before. So I guess it wasn't that the result is saying that people are worse off from accessing that, but thinking about what does that mean for their expectation, their understanding of those services and what their needs are, perhaps. So yeah, definitely.
Kirsty, I know there is some research that's happening a little bit now, that's in the early stages, around how people self-advocate during the transitions in their care over that journey of rehabilitation. And often there's so many transitions, isn't there? There's that transition from acute care to inpatient rehabilitation, from inpatient rehabilitation to a transitional service, to a day hospital, to an ABIOS, to NDIS providers, and often people reflect and share that having to tell their story over and over and over again, and it can be really tiring and challenging. but we don't know as much about, particularly given the impact of cognitive and executive functioning impairment, how people with brain injury are able to really self-advocate for their own needs, particularly during those transitions. So I think that's an area that, building upon your research would be quite interesting to explore in more depth. And then maybe just one other point that I'll acknowledge is, I think in Queensland, it'd be fair enough to acknowledge that there has been an under-resourcing and investment in specialist post-discharge community rehabilitation, and there's processes in place seeking to address that presently, which I think hopefully will lead to better outcomes in the future. But it does mean that there's fragmentation in the system, and unfortunately people are not always able to access all of the components of care that are necessary to drive successful outcomes into the longer term. It's great that Karen stumbled across the STEPS program, but I think as a health system, it's not good enough that that's what we would accept moving forward, that we really need to ensure that there are proactive ways of ensuring that people are able to be empowered to know what is out there at the time that they need it the most, and have the ability to connect to those services in a timely way. So yeah, just a few thoughts there.
Fantastic, thank you. I have so many thoughts in my head here, and I have to try to confine them. Kirsty has also, thinking about what you said, Ben, around we need to look towards how we can support people to build those sustainable networks of support. And certainly the second part of Kirsty's thesis was looking at a network of analysis of exactly that. And so I think that's a really interesting comment, and I think a very valuable comment and thought. And I guess I'm wondering, from Tim's perspective or Karen's perspective, were there things that you feel have helped you to develop those networks of support, or are you still working on them? I'd love to hear your perspectives. Maybe to Karen first. Yes.
Yeah. I definitely find that my social skills over time have improved, and that's only been through communicating and networking with like-minded people. And I say that because and once again, I'm talking about STEPS, but I go to STEPS and I see the bravery in others that have been through it before me, that provides me courage to try something new or adjust my behaviour in a certain way. And relinking back into the community, it seems such an easy thing to do, but in your own social circle, you're sort of the odd person out. Whereas I go to STEPS, and no disrespect to my fellow STEP members, but we're not the odd people. It's the person without the brain injury sitting in the room that is the odd person out. And I think that, we have processes in place to help with, OT support and speech therapy and physiotherapy. And I just think the bit that's missing from my perspective that links all of that is the social rehabilitation. And I think that then helps you move forward today, tomorrow, and for the rest of your life. And we're all trying to make a better version of ourselves, and we can only do that through networking and participating in the community. And having the STEPS program, it's with you for life now. So every month I know I can go and have a chat or a coffee with someone who gets me, which is so important when you're trying to still navigate your life. We're still in fight or flight mode. So to be around others that get it really makes a difference. And the absence of health professionals and therapists that know about the STEPS program makes me sad, because others could really benefit from that lifelong further support that doesn't require a therapist or a doctor or a specialist. It's that social support.
Great, thank you, Karen. Tim?
Yeah, I think that social support side was, a side that I really missed once I left the ABI TRS program. Like, I was told about STEPS and I sort of tried to get involved with it a little bit, but yeah, just during that initial first few months after I left the ABI TRS program, was when COVID was running rampant in southeast Queensland.
Yes.
So yeah, in the end, I don't think I was able to get along to any of the STEPS sessions before like work started coming back in more regularly. And yeah, I definitely relate to a thing of like in my social circles, I was the only one that had a brain injury. I was lucky to have a distant cousin who'd had a brain injury, who I sort of saw semi-regularly through then. So we were able to bounce off each other a little bit and be like, oh, so you had that too, and that kind of thing that I'm sure STEPS is great for. Certainly that social side, I think, it's got to be something that we both like the patients and services work on. The services can be great for doing occupational therapy, physio, psychological. The social stuff really brings that all together and says, all right, you've got an hour and a half to socialize and hang out here. Hopefully you're well enough physically, you kind of got a little bit of money from somewhere to spend whilst you hang out together, and then just meeting with like-minded people, who you don't have to explain all the ins and outs every time because they know a little bit of it, in some way. So
great, thank you, Tim. We have had a late breaking question popped in the chat, Kirsty. The question comes from Rachel. Was there any detail from the assessment tools about possible unmet rehabilitation needs that were relating to the expertise of the rehabilitation providers once the transitional services ceased? So I guess that. Sorry, you go.
I think that's a really great question. So that wasn't captured. However, I think, that's a really important point, and definitely an area for future research. And that was something that emerged from the scoping review that we conducted. And also, I guess, Louise touched on the other kind of portion of my research, which was looking at the social network analysis. And one component of that was looking at some of the concepts that were identified. So something like expertise, which we included, and how that impacted individuals' experience of the services. So we did have a look at that with the other research, because we thought that was a really important point too.
Thanks, Kirsty. We have about 4 minutes remaining, and I'm just going to throw one last thing out for anyone on the panel to respond to. The focus of Kirsty's thesis was very much on understanding the appropriateness of care that people were receiving, and the panel have talked about it, and we certainly can't ignore that this is very much an individualised experience. So moving forwards, what do you think we could maybe consider or explore further within the current rehabilitation pathway to help us better identify or certainly understand what is needed for the ongoing care and services that people are receiving to be appropriate to them and their needs. I might throw to you, Ben, first of all, if I can. Sorry.
Thanks, Louise. It's a big question.
I know.
In many respects. Look, I guess I feel very passionately that the impact of a moderate to severe brain injury on a person's life is such that we really need to emphasize that the journey of rehabilitation doesn't end when a person leaves hospital, that we shouldn't and can't accept that people will be discharged home to nothing, that we really need a network of services that captures all people in the state to ensure that they're not lost to follow-up. And that's where I think service expansion and growth is absolutely necessary. I also then feel that, I guess, building upon what Karen and Tim acknowledged, that as people progress through their journey of rehabilitation, there's that shift, I guess, from what we traditionally sort of see as impairment-focused therapy in those earlier stages to what we'd probably more refer to as functional or participatory approaches to rehabilitation, where it is really about getting back into life and doing the things, and that social rehabilitation that Karen spoke about. So we need to sometimes in that space think outside the box a little bit, and you know, the emphasis on peer support and so forth can be really critical factors in driving outcomes. And then ultimately coming back to that whole aspect of building networks of support that are going to continue. There are limitations and constraints, particularly from a health service perspective, on exactly the time frame that the health service response can continue for. But if we're investing in developing networks of support that connect people to the next phase of that journey, will go a long way to ensuring that whatever outcomes are achieved can be sustained and built upon in the next chapter of whatever that looks like for the person. So yeah, there are a few of my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Karen, Tim, Sally, would you add anything to that before we close?
I would just quickly add that you know, across this rehab journey and even starting in the inpatient hospital setting, just that inclusion of family and significant others throughout that rehab process to ensure their understanding of the injury and to build their capacity to continue supporting the individual ongoing, and also the acknowledgement that the injury of their loved one has an impact on them as well. So making sure that they've got linkages to support systems of their own to sustain that relationship going forward.
Brilliant. Well, we are pretty much right on time. Sorry, Karen, were you going to add something then? No? Look, I would like to thank our presenter, Kirsty, and our panel very much today. I would also like to thank all of you who have attended today's Hopkins Hour. We really appreciate you all making the time to come and listen to our wonderful speakers and panels. It's certainly been such a pleasure to have you all join us, and I've really enjoyed the conversation, so I hope that you all have as well. I think for me, the things that I'm hearing as key messages are around this being a lifelong experience, and that there are certainly things and investment and ways that we can improve and better recognise the individualised nature of the experience and the needs of people. So we look forward to that certainly continuing to develop. If you would like to get in touch with with Kirsty today, then certainly please do so, or you can contact us through the Hopkins Centre, and the email address is there for you. And I would like just to wish you all the very best for the rest of your Wednesday. So thank you again, everyone, and we will see you again at our next Hopkins Hour. Bye for now.